sometimes Metro, but the others put it in formal writing. NEPA process was not followed when our project, Third Bridge Now, and 70 components were removed, which would have taken care of the I-84, I-5 interchange. So thank you very much. I can't see a clock on this, and I don't even know if I'm still speaking. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Sharon.
And that was our last public commenter.
Okay, great. All right. We have a lot to think about with all the comments that we've just received, but we're going to keep moving forward here through our agenda. And next, we're going to hear from Julie Meredith, Secretary of the State Department of Transportation, Washington. And then we'll hear from our director, Lisa Sumption. So, Julie, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. As you heard, I'm Julie Meredith. I'm the Secretary of the Washington State Department of Transportation, and I'm pleased to be here. The IBR program, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project, is a critical bi-state investment and is vital to both Washington and Oregon's economic competitiveness and our nation's freight network. A resilient bridge ensures our community members can get to work, travel to see family, and take part of activities that are essential to their daily lives. I have 25 years of experience on mega projects like this, and while each project is unique, I'm familiar with the challenges and opportunities delivering these projects presents. And as the IBR team continues to build out and fill out their team with more experience in construction delivery, we're moving from the National Environmental NEPA process that we've been in, an environmental process, doing the natural shift to move to the construction phase and bringing in the expertise to deliver that. We have a path forward for construction, and both states' Department of Transportations are working together toward that next step, including advancing the first funded phase contract, which will be out for bids this fall, and we're looking to award next spring. And as you'll hear in more detail in the meeting, delivering this bridge requires a balanced funding strategy, and tolling is an essential component of that plan. I-5 is one of the most important north-south freight corridors on the West Coast, and the existing bridge is vulnerable. It's a major bottleneck for commuters and freight. And replacing the bridge will improve safety and seismic resilience, provide more reliable travel times, and support future high-capacity transit and active transportation. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to modernize our system. Tolling this bridge will allow Washington and Corridor to advance construction. It will provide opportunities for family wage jobs and, as I said, deliver a resilient bridge. Tolling will be a user-based approach. Those who use the corridor contribute to construction and the long-term operation. The tolling revenue will provide upfront bonding capacity for our construction project and a long-term stable revenue stream to support financing, maintenance, and operations. Tolling has been a successful part of our funding, part of our mega programs across Washington State, including the 520 floating bridge in Puget Sound, the Interstate 405 program with express toll lanes, and the Puget Sound Gateway program. The Interstate Bridge Project is a shared commitment between Washington, Oregon, and the federal government. Each partner plays a role. Federal funding is a substantial share, but both states are contributing significant resources, and tolling helps close the remaining gap for the critical first funded phase. Maintaining this balance is critical to keeping the program on track and competitive for federal funding. We are committed to working with the commissions in both Washington and Oregon to support setting toll rates through a demonstrated and transparent process. We are committed to clear communication and public engagement as tolling decisions are being developed and made. Both our states are also equally committed to our equity commitments throughout this project. Both states are working to help evaluate the low-income toll programs. In closing, the goal of our systems in our states is a fair, predictable process and provides real multimodal options at the end of our construction. We remain committed to working with both commissions, our federal partners, and the public to deliver a modern, resilient, and reliable crossing. And I'd like to again thank you for having me here today, to all the commissioners for being here today and playing a vital role in the delivery of this program. Thanks. You're still muted for me.
Thank you. I would just talk along here. So next we're going to have Director Lisa Sumption from the Oregon Department of Transportation speak. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Chair Brown and Chair Young and members of the Oregon and Washington State Transportation Commissions. My name is Lisa Sumption, and I have had the privilege of serving as the interim director here at ODOT for the last 5 months. Thanks for having me here today. Julie said a lot of these same things, but I just want to just a big reminder, right? The heart of this program is the people, and this is a very complex project, though. But this corridor is a critical lifeline for the region and the nation, connecting Oregon and Washington to support jobs and move billions of dollars in goods each year. This work, the work that we do every day, is because of our deep commitment to the people and the communities in Oregon and Washington. Our communities have voiced their concerns, and you heard those this morning about the challenges they experienced, and this has been going on for decades: significant congestion, safety issues, earthquake vulnerability, impaired freight movement, inadequate bicycle and pedestrian pathways, and limited public transportation options that connect Portland and Vancouver. We've heard them, and the IBR program is our response to those concerns. This project is exceedingly complex from both an engineering perspective and because it connects 2 distinct communities and 2 states. Together, we share on the responsibility to ensure that we deliver this critical bi-state investment to serve the people in both Oregon and Washington that rely on this bridge to stay connected to work, family, and support our regional economies. Over the last several months, I've had the honor to get to know some of the individuals who make up the IBR team across both ODOT and WashDOT. Both Oregon and Washington are profoundly committed to the success of this effort. They have faced and continue to work through significant challenges that I know every one of you are often working alongside to help support, guide, and hold accountable. I thank you all for that. In conclusion, like with infrastructure project this big, it's often easy to lose sight of the individual lives that will be impacted by the decisions that we make. As you're considering the tolling information presented today, I encourage you to remember it in the light of the larger IBR program narrative and that all the people that we are serving. We're on the verge of creating something that will leave a lasting legacy in this region and have positive impacts across the country. The IBR program is quickly advancing to construction, with the record of decision anticipated later this summer, followed by the release of the request for qualifications and proposals for the Columbia River Bridge Replacement Contract. And finally, our contractor selection is anticipated to occur in early 2027. Concurrently, the IBR program is working to ensure the necessary funding is secured and able to be obligated, with tolling being a key component of the overall financial plan. As departments of transportation across the country look for sustainable transportation funding options, because we're not alone in this journey, tolling is an important part of the conversation for generating revenue to construct and maintain bridges and other transportation infrastructure. Tolling is a necessary component of our funding strategy and will help us advance to construction, providing tens of thousands family wage jobs, and tolling will help ensure the people who use the infrastructure the most help contribute to its ongoing operations and maintenance costs. It is equally important to evaluate the options that help meet the needs of the community members who rely on the infrastructure. The people in the region need this project, and tolling is a key component of being able to see it through to completion. We remain committed to working collaboratively with you in a transparent process and developing a tolling system and its policies that are fair and predictable for its users, while also generating the revenue needed to begin building the IBR program. Thank you for asking the hard questions. Thank you for taking the hard comments and the challenging decisions that come along with this important work. And lastly, thank you for the honor of serving alongside of all of you for the last several months. It has been my pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, we're going to talk about tolling level 3 traffic and revenue study, but I just want to remind all the commissioners that both states commissions advance these scenarios and the analysis in our last joint meeting in October of 2024. So now we're going to turn to the staff to give us an update on the revenue study and the traffic study. I guess I should have called it traffic and revenue study. Good morning, Carly.
Good morning, Chair Brown, Chair Young, and Vice Chairs Restucci and Lee, and all commission members. Thank you so much for having us here. I'll provide a few introductory slides and then we'll turn it over to the experts who've been doing this work. So if we can go to the next slide. And again, I'm Carly Francis. I'm the interim program administrator for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. We are working fast and furious towards advancing bridge replacement. Specifically, earlier this year, we identified a core set of projects to advance as the initial body of work starting over the river, which is the critical place to start on this program. That body of work identified was replacing the bridges themselves, connecting them to I-5 so that everybody can use them, connecting them to Hayden Island and SR-14, the extension of light rail to Vancouver, and removal of the existing bridges. That cost was identified to be $7.65 billion. Folks are aware we also have updated our costs since the beginning of the year, so that is part of the updated cost estimate of $14.4 billion. What's most notable is that we have found a pathway forward to begin the body of work. So we have available funding that will allow us to advance the bridge replacement contract and then continue to work on the program over time, because delivering a program of this size and scale is necessary through phasing. We must use sort of a progressive body of work to advance this program forward. And each of those phases, critical to both federal funders as well as everybody in the public, is that those activities that we produce, each individual phase has to be usable by folks, has to provide benefits and are significant benefits with replacing the bridge and also continuing the program over time. Next slide. This is the first funded phase that we've identified for the program. Again, this does start over the main channel of the river itself by replacing the interstate bridges, connecting them to I-5, Hayden Island and SR-14, removing the existing bridges. This also includes pre-completion tolling, the implementation body of work, as well as those physical components necessary for tolling, and transit design for the light rail extension we spoke about previously. The cost for this body of work is $5.68 billion and will produce a seismically resilient structure over the river with shoulders to provide safe space for breakdowns that happen on the bridge itself, an auxiliary lane in both directions, also a shared use path that is connected to Hayden Island and on the Washington side at the Vancouver waterfront. And also then space on that bridge for light rail to facilitate that future extension of service. Next slide. We have this available funding. So as I mentioned, we have the available funding to advance the program forward. So the black line on this slide notes we have $5.69 billion that's been identified. That is just above that 5.68 that I just mentioned. This is comprised of $2.1 billion from the federal government. Those are the first two lines that you see. Also, $1 billion in funding from both Washington and Oregon, which are the next three lines. Some previous state funding, and then the update that's happened since our cost estimate went live, and you'll hear more about that later today, as an update on the projected toll funding amount. So this line used to read $1.25 billion through the work of the Washington State Treasurer and Oregon Department of Transportation Finance Group in conjunction with our municipal advisors. We've been able to update this to $1.5 billion, and that brings us to the 5.69. And then beyond this is the critical work to continue seeking funding and moving the rest of the program forward. Most notably, you'll see just below that black line is a capital investment grant from the Federal Transit Administration. That's $1 billion that we continue to seek from the federal government. Next slide. As noted, we are working currently to complete the NEPA process. So receiving the record of decision is essential to advancing construction. That is the approval from the federal government that we can move ahead. We're also working to update the financial plan and get that approved by the federal government. That does also, we'll look forward as we think about delivering this program in phases. We'll also look at construction sequencing and funding strategies, and make sure that we have grant amendment agreements completed by the end of September. That is critical to retaining all of that 2.1 billion in federal funds. As noted by Director Assumption and Secretary Meredith, we are transitioning to construction delivery. We had a successful industry event yesterday to socialize the intended publication of the request for qualifications in maybe as early as next month. So that is ongoing. And also we're working on the team inside the office to understand what it means and to build out appropriately a delivery arm of our organization, and using the expertise from the state of Washington on progressive design build to help inform how we build that out. That work is all ongoing, and we're very excited about the opportunity to advance these critical stages so that we can get a shovel in the ground and get a bridge started over the river. I think that's the end of my slides, and then we'll move on to Liz Horta and Brent Baker, who can speak about the level 3 analysis itself.
Thank you, Carly. Good morning, Chair Brown, Chair Young, and all the commissioners. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Liz Horta. I work with Stantec Consulting, and I have been leading the Level 3 Traffic and Revenue Study for the I-5 Bridge, which we will provide an overview of today. Next slide, please. So today our presentation is going to provide an overview of the assumptions and results. We'll walk through the process of how we did this study, the data we've collected, the assumptions, and the initial traffic and revenue results for the alternatives that have been analyzed and will be reviewed today. Next slide. The rate setting process, which our study supports, is an iterative process. The commissions recommend toll policies. The traffic and revenue team evaluates the toll policies and scenarios. State treasurers conduct a financial analysis on those initial results. And then the commissions review the analysis and recommend next steps. This can result in refinements and review of additional alternatives and is completely up to the commissions. So today we're going to be talking through initial results, kind of the first iteration of this rate setting level 3 process. Next slide. The objective of the level 3 forecast that we're going to be reviewing, the initial version of today, is to provide annual toll traffic and net revenue forecasts to support toll rate setting and the adoption of formal toll policy, as well as to secure a credit rating on proposed debt from rating agencies and support future financing. The financial analysis, which was conducted by Washington's Office of the State Treasurer and Oregon DOT's debt manager, financial advisor, estimate that for the amount of capital funding, their analysis helps estimate the amount of capital funding that may be leveraged from the estimated net toll revenues to help support the construction costs. Next slide. The process that we go through as part of developing these level 3 traffic and revenue forecasts includes developing an independent forecast grounded in extensive professional experience in conducting similar studies nationwide. We look for a lot of new data and information. The process used specifically for this study built off of Metro's regional travel demand model. And then we use that information and pushed it through Stantec's toll diversion model, which was developed custom for this facility. And then it also goes through a series of post-processing in a spreadsheet-based model to take those demand and average day estimates and turn them into an annual forecast of net revenues that can be used for this. And that does include a layer of judgment and review of whether the forecasts make sense and are they backed by the data that has been observed in this area and elsewhere. Next slide. Some of the data that was collected in support of this level 3 TNR study included new and more recent than previous study traffic data, land use forecasts, and stated preference surveys. Next slide, please. Some of the traffic data collected included permanent count stations throughout the region maintained by Washington and Oregon. We also conducted some independent field count data through a traffic vendor that included counts at some of these same locations to help validate and verify, as well as floating car travel time runs. We also looked at speed information available from sources such as Google Maps, which we compared with the floating travel time data. And we also looked at some origin destination patterns from sources such as Streetlight. We reviewed all of these data against each other to help make sure that we were really reviewing all of the information available to us and cross-referencing and using our judgment to see what makes sense amongst all these data sources. Next slide. We also have an independent land use forecast that was developed for this study specifically by a subconsultant. The land use forecasts are key inputs to the travel demand model. They help estimate what future population and households will be in the region, and as well as employment. So this feeds into the regional demand model and helps generate the amount of future traffic or future regional trips. It helps estimate how many of them may choose a car and assign where they might be trying to come from and go to in the future, which may be different than today. The process of developing these forecasts includes a review of recent information and developing a base year 2024 baseline population, households, and employment. So this is looking at a lot of the publicly available information and is used to help calibrate our model. So for existing conditions, this is the traffic and the patterns we're seeing. And it also looks at available sources of future information, including official published forecasts from Washington and Oregon, as well as other sources such as permit data for future development and things of that sort. The projected annual growth for the region is roughly 1% annual growth in households and 1% annual growth in employment throughout the forecast period. And this level of detail was looked at specifically for Clark County, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties that are really pertinent to the study area. Next slide. In addition, we also worked with a subconsultant to conduct a stated preference survey, which is a scientific survey to collect data for statistical modeling of travel choice behaviors. The purpose of this study is to estimate willingness to pay a toll in exchange for potential travel time savings. And this was conducted for passenger vehicles and operators of commercial vehicles, trying to understand their travel patterns across the Columbia River today. The survey was administered in April 2025 via an online survey platform. The passenger survey was distributed via postcard invitations, online panels, and through an IVR program newsletter. The commercial survey link was distributed also through postcard invitations, the Trucking Association newsletters, and included field intercepts at key locations where truckers were stopping and available to answer questions. Next slide. The analysis of the stated preference survey helps estimate value of time based on the survey data and informs the assumptions and inputs for traffic forecasting under tolled conditions. This is not a standalone analysis output, but an input to our modeling process. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to get into some study-specific assumptions. We talked about the data that helped update everything, but what did we actually analyze? We looked at 4 toll rate scenarios that were approved by the joint Oregon and Washington commissions in October of 2024, which we'll get into on the next slide. The current assumptions used in this analysis we'll review today assume that pre-completion tolling will begin on July 1st, 2028, which is the start of fiscal year 2029. They assume that the post-completion tolling start date, when the new bridge is open and operational, would be July 1st, 2035, which is the start of fiscal year 2036. Overnight hours between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. are assumed to be operated toll-free during the pre-completion period. So those first early years of the forecast do assume no overnight tolling. And our current cost assumptions have been updated to assume that WashDOT will be the toll administrator, since they have the current operating facility for the toll roads in Washington. And they've also been updated to include different types of costs, such as bridge insurance. Next slide. On the screen here, we have a matrix that has been shared previously. It's been slightly modified just to remove some duplicate headers and make it just a little easier to read. But this is the same information that you've all seen before. These are the 4 scenarios that were analyzed, and I'm going to talk through them. There's a lot of information here, all packed into one small package. So the first 2 columns show the range of toll rates that are estimated or that are assumed for each scenario pre-completion, which is fiscal year 29 through fiscal year 2035, and post-completion, which is fiscal year 2036 and beyond. The pre-completion tolls range from $1.55 in scenarios 1 and 2 as the lower bound, and around $3 to $4 as the upper bound. Specifically, scenario 1 has tolls that are on the lower range during those peak hours with some trade-offs. Scenario 1 has a higher truck multiplier assumed, so it would have higher truck tolls in exchange for lower car tolls during those peak periods. The different colors in columns 1 and 2 help identify where there are similarities between scenarios, and this is true for the rest of the table as well. So in the pre-completion period for scenario 1, those toll rates are lower than any of the other scenarios. The post-completion toll rates in scenario 1 are similar to the earlier toll rates in scenario 2, as you can see by the blue shading. Scenario 2 has slightly higher toll rates than scenario 1, but it does offer lower toll rates during the pre-completion period and slightly higher toll rates in the post-completion period. The trade-off here is we've got a slightly lower truck toll than in scenario 1, which is consistent. This 1.5 multiplier and 3 times multiplier for heavy vehicles is consistent with current policy in Washington. It also has a 3-step tier on weekend toll rates, which does assume slightly higher toll rates during the midday on weekends. So as I said, there's some trade-offs here. Scenario 3 has same tolls post-completion as scenario 2, but also starts with those slightly higher toll rates in the early years. So there is no change in toll rate between the pre-completion period and the post-completion toll rate in 2026 dollars. There is escalation built into all the scenarios that I'll come back to in a second. Scenario 4 was designed to have slightly higher toll rates than the other scenarios, and those toll rates are consistent both pre and post-completion toll rate period in terms of 2026 dollars. Scenario 3 has slightly lower weekend toll rates. Scenario 4 has those slightly higher weekend toll rates. Scenarios 2, 3, and 4 all have similar truck tolls or similar truck multipliers. And the other key that I want to point out is that scenarios 1 and 2 include the assumption that a 50% toll discount would be offered for low-income eligible drivers as soon as the bridge opens. As soon as the new bridge opens. And scenarios 3 and 4 would assume as soon as practical, which for the purposes of this analysis is when pre-completion tolling begins. The other thing that is built into all scenarios is the assumption that tolls would escalate annually. That means that every year there would be a default toll increase. So for example, toll rates in the if the bridge were to open in 2026, these would be the toll rates. But the year later, all toll rates would increase by a default assumption of 2.15 for scenarios 1, 2, and 3. And then scenario 4 has slightly different assumptions where instead of increasing every year, it increases by a slightly higher number every 2 years, which results in lower escalation over the long term. I'd also like to note that the final toll rates on opening day depend on when the opening day is. These toll rates here were originally designed assuming a fiscal year 2026 start date. So escalation is subject to change for early years, depending on the final rate setting. To show what the current assumptions are for that opening year, we can go to the next slide. This is an example of what our analysis assumes as the toll rates when pre-completion tolling begins in scenario 2. So as you can see on this graph, we have time period hours of the day across the x-axis, toll rates on the y-axis, and there are no tolls. It's $0 in that overnight period. So you can see on the left, the 12 to 1 a.m. through 4 to 5 a.m., no tolls. During the post-completion tolling period, those will be tolled, but during pre-completion, while there's overnight construction and things like that going on, it's assumed that there will be no tolling overnight. The green bars represent weekday tolls. So in the morning, when there's commuter traffic, those tolls would go as high as $3.81. During the midday, when traffic backs off a little bit, they would drop to $2.35. In the evening commute, they would go back up to $3.81, and then they would come back down to $2.35 later in the evening. On the weekends, which is shown by the purple bars that are slightly offset behind here, the less busy times on the weekends would have a lower toll rate of $1.62. And then you see here that there are 2 steps up. The scenario 2 assumes those slightly higher weekend tolls with a 3-tiered approach. So tolls would jump up to, or step up to $2.35, and then in the middle of the day to $2.97. In the evening, they would come back down to $2.35 and then $1.62. In the scenario where there's only 2 steps on the weekend, they don't make this additional step in the middle of the day. They stay at that slightly lower rate all day. So scenario 2 includes 3 steps, and that's what we're showing on this graph. But some of the other scenarios have 2 steps, so those weekend toll rates do average a little bit lower. Okay, next slide. There are several discount and exemption programs assumed in all scenarios. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we do assume that there is a low income discount program in all scenarios. The timing of when that begins varies by scenario, with some scenarios offering this discount on day 1 and some scenarios offering it when the new bridge is online. The assumption is that the discount would be 50% for eligible low-income customers, and the eligibility criteria would be based on household income within 200% of the federal poverty line, and they would need to be registered and have a good-to-go account. We also have included the existing tribal preemptions recognized in Washington, which include the Yakima and Nez Perce tribes and is based on their treaty language. And in addition, we've also included assumptions that emergency vehicles, maintenance vehicles, and organized militia would be exempt from tolls. There is an additional sensitivity analysis that we'll discuss later in this meeting that did consider additional tribal discounts or exemptions. Next slide, please. This page is helping provide an overview of how low-income toll discounts were analyzed. We did look at available regional population and employment and household income data. Again, the eligibility requires that you're within 200% of the federal poverty line and take the step to register for an account. We looked at household income segmentation information from Metro's regional travel demand model, as well as American Community Survey data from 2023, which is it's data that helps update census data on a more recent term. We assumed, for the purposes of this analysis, that of all those who are eligible, 60% would take that additional step to enroll in the program. And the results of the analysis are that 4 to 6% of total annual transactions on the I-5 interstate bridge under these toll scenarios are estimated to participate in such a low-income discount program. And that would represent 2 to 3% of total annual gross revenues would be estimated to come from low-income transactions. On the right, we have a diagram that's just helping illustrate how we narrowed down how many trips on the bridge might be low income. We started with total traffic in the region that might qualify as low income, how many auto trips those might represent. Sorry, I said that backward. We started with total traffic and looked at auto trips, estimated what percentage of them might be low income based on the regional statistics, how many of them would have registered accounts, and how many of them would actively enroll. Next slide. This slide is presenting a summary of the traffic estimates over time for the 4 different scenarios. As you can see, looking at, general magnitude, the 4 scenarios are relatively close to each other. We've got time on the x-axis and annual traffic volume in millions on the y-axis. The highest line, which is that dotted orange line, represents scenario 1, which has the lowest tolls. So those tolls, people are a little bit more willing to pay because they're slightly lower, so we see slightly higher traffic. Conversely, the solid purple line represents scenario 4, which has the highest tolls in the early years. Scenario 4 has slightly different escalation assumptions for how those tolls update over time. And over time, those tolls do come more in line with the other 3 scenarios. So you see out in those outer years, the lines all sort of converge as those tolls get closer to each other in value. Next slide, please. It is true that when tolling is introduced on the I-5 interstate bridge, traffic is expected to respond in a variety of ways, including changes in trip destinations, frequency of travel, time of day travel, and mode of travel. Traffic diversion, or avoidance of tolls, and the effect on the transportation network is documented and captured in the environmental study documentation. The purpose of this traffic and revenue study is to project a conservative number of trips that will use the I-5 bridge once tolling is implemented so that we can estimate an achievable toll revenue generation. To reasonably project bridge use under tolling, this study does account for toll avoidance. However, the focus of the study is projection of trips on the toll bridge and not projection of trips on other facilities. In addition, this study does allow for a period of transition as the community adjusts to tolling and is, again, conservative, especially in those early years of the forecast. And with the next slide, I'm going to hand it over to Brent Baker from WSP to talk through the adjustments that are made to these traffic forecasts and early revenue. I'm wrong. We still have potential revenue. This one's still me. Sorry. So potential revenue is the revenue that you would get if you take the number of trips that cross the facility under tolled conditions times their toll rate. That is potential revenue. There are extra adjustments that Brent will talk through in a minute. But if we just look at that first number, The purple line, which on the previous slide showed the lowest traffic, is now the highest line. The purple represents scenario 4, which has those higher toll rates. So even though it has slightly lower traffic projected, it does generate slightly higher revenue in those early years. Scenarios 1, 2, and 3 generate very similar revenues over time to each other. That you can see those lines are slightly below the purple line, but almost exactly on top of each other. And that was by design. The way that the scenarios were developed, it was looking at those trade-offs, but targeting a similar net revenue. So again, we've got scenario 1 has slightly lower car tolls, but higher truck tolls. Scenario 2 has slightly higher toll rates, but lower truck tolls, and so on. So, and over time in those future years, similar to the traffic graph, we do see those numbers kind of converge as that scenario 4 escalates slightly more slowly. And you can see a little bit of a sawtooth in the purple pattern related to that escalation in toll rates every 2 years. Okay, and with that, I will hand it over to Brent for real this time.
Good morning, Brent Baker, Financial Structures Lead for the ABR program, and it's a pleasure to be here. Chairs Young and Brown, Vice Chairs Byers and Rasucci, and Commissioners. So Liz has talked about the traffic and revenue study and getting to that gross toll revenue potential. I'm going to take it the next steps here to how we get to net toll revenue, which is really the cash flow measure that determines how much can be borrowed or used for upfront capital funding for construction. And so we'll start with that gross toll revenue, and we're basically, the investors, our lenders, the contract that will ultimately be engaged in to lenders to borrow money, typically stipulates how this order works, and what sort of is composed of net toll revenues, which again is what's available there to then support financing. So we start with the gross toll revenue, and we make a series of adjustments to measure the actual amount we're going to collect. And then the additional adjustments are made for operations and maintenance of the facility. So that's maintaining the existing bridge, including its lift span, as well as the new bridge when it comes online. And all the operations and maintenance goes with that, plus the operations and maintenance for the toll collection function. And when we get through making those adjustments to the gross toll revenues and the amounts we actually are going to collect, and then the operations and maintenance costs and other adjustments, we get to that net toll revenue number that you see circled down there kind of near the bottom of the waterfall. And the net toll revenue, its sort of primary uses of that would be then to pay debt service on the bonds that will be sold. And you're going to hear more about that from both states here shortly, as well as make deposits to various required reserve accounts. So having rainy day funds available to withstand any fluctuations there might be. And then also to make deposits to repair and replacement. So bridges and roads require capital replacement activities over time. Those are periodic costs that are sort of above and beyond major or regular maintenance. And tolls provide a sustainable source of revenues for setting aside funds to make those periodic repair and replacements to keep this asset strong. And finally, in addition to paying debt service on bonds that might be used for construction, net toll revenues also provide a source of revenues directly for pay-as-you-go construction expenditures. So on the next slide, we'll take a look at the adjusted gross toll revenues. So this is the line that shows sort of what we're actually going to collect. Very similar to the line that Liz just showed you for gross toll revenue potential. And we make a couple of adjustments to this. First of all, there will be some unbillable revenue due to unreadable license plates or unidentifiable owners. Typically, those are folks that do not have an account. And there will potentially be some, at least initially, unpaid toll revenue for those who do not have an account and get a bill by the mail and do not make a timely payment of that toll bill. We do account, though, for recovering a portion of that revenue over time. And some of these things that also contribute to increases there will be likely transponder sales revenue once initial transponders that have been distributed. There will be a small fee collected for having an account but not having a transponder in your car, so paying with a license plate in the current WashDOT scheme. And I should say these things will be subject to the commission's purview, but looking at how it's done currently in Washington, there is a 25-cent fee for having an account but not having a transponder in your vehicle. There's a $5 late payment fee if you get a toll bill in the mail because you don't have an account and you fail to pay it in 30 days, and so forth. So there are some revenue increases that are collected along the way, and this is just the assumptions that were used in this particular TNR study. So let's jump to the net toll revenues on the next slide. To get to net toll revenues from those revenues collected, again, we're going to be deducting the operations and maintenance costs. So let's start on the toll collection side. There are shared system-wide costs because the I-5 bridge will become part of the Washington State's system of toll collection. So some of those costs are shared. So we don't have to bear all of those as I-5 because we can share some of those system-wide costs for our back office system software, customer service center, with the other Washington facilities. And so those costs will be shared proportionally. Things that are included in that are the transponder purchase and distribution costs, credit card fees, or sort of bank card processing fees, state and consultant operations costs, and then those back office and customer service center vendors. There are some costs that are going to be very specific to the I-5 bridge, and that will, of course, be the maintenance of the bridge itself, the bridge and roadway, the maintenance of the toll equipment on the I-5 bridge, and then the potential the possibility, which we have included in our forecast as a conservative measure, that there might be bridge insurance premiums to be paid to basically protect the asset so that we have funds available to repair it if something's damaged, say there was an event with the existing bridge, as well as replace that revenue stream. And then those downstream uses of net toll revenue that we mentioned earlier, which are the sort of the major capital repair and replacement costs for the facilities and replacing the toll equipment over time. So on the next slide, we will jump ahead here to kind of get to what the key takeaways are. So as Liz mentioned, scenarios 1, 2, and 3, as we worked with the commissions previously in 2024, those were designed to achieve roughly the same net revenue and therefore funding target. What you're going to hear about today is using scenario 2 as kind of representative of those 3. Scenario 4, with its higher tolls, was available as something to be tested to potentially yield more funding. However, the analysis has shown that the requirement that the financial plan for the first funded phase that you heard Carly Francis talk about, that requires $1.5 billion in toll funding. And that financial base case assumes scenario 2 tolls, and the work that you'll hear about in a minute from the Washington Office of the State Treasurer and Oregon's debt manager have confirmed that 1.5 billion in toll funding is possible with those scenario 2 tolls. Now, the scenarios 1 and 3 were not analyzed, but as the line on the prior chart showed you, they have very similar net toll revenues, so we would expect them to have similar financial capacity outcomes. And I think it's just important to note that the level 3 toll TNR forecast with the net toll revenue projections, they will be updated as the commissions, as you all work to finalize what tolls and policies you'd like to have in place prior to the formal adoption of toll rates. We will take those selections and information, as well as updated data and any other information that has been renewed since then regarding discounts, exemptions, and so forth. And there will be the opportunity to revisit that and provide an updated forecast to further confirm the financial sufficiency of tolls to meet all obligations including the debt service on borrowed funds. So with that, I will turn it back over to our moderator. Thank you.
I wonder if there are any questions from the commissioners, if you want to take questions that are specific to this, or if we want to just keep going and wait till our comments at the end. Looking for some guidance from the rest of the commission. Should we keep going? They give me a thumbs up. Oh, okay, Commissioner Chang.
Just one question specific to the presentation that we just had. I was trying to get a sense, some of those scenarios produce more revenue sooner and some produce more revenue later. I was trying to put that information together with an understanding of our debt servicing. So, we borrow a certain amount of money. We have, in one scenario, we collect more money sooner, another we collect more money later. I'm wondering about the sensitivity of our debt service payments to those different revenue scenarios. I mean, is that in the scenarios where we collect more money later, does that result in substantial amounts more debt service in the near term, or more strain on actually, I guess what I meant was, if we are not able to cover as much debt service in the near term, does that mean that we pay a lot more debt service overall in the long term?
Chairs Young and Brown, happy to take Commissioner Chang's question. I think, though, it is probably best directed at speakers we're going to hear from in a moment on the financial capacity. I will say that early year revenues tend to be the most valuable revenues for borrowing. But I think this is probably a question that would be best addressed by those that are going to be speaking here in a moment, and perhaps after their presentation, if I may suggest.
I can wait. Thank you.
Commissioner Ransom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the presenters, I think good presentation. I was able to follow along. I have a question specific to slide 26, and there may be value just in pulling that forward. So the question that I get sometimes from stakeholders is, I see the three-step model here represented by time of day. And so the question is, how are those steps, the actual value of the step, created or developed? For example, a weekday 5 to 6 a.m. 297. Is that rate correlated to a performance metric? Is that rate related to just the fiscal model and what it would be based on the totality of all these rates at different times of day? Could you share with us and those that are interested, just is there flex? Is there wiggle room in that? Just a sense of how that might be developed going forward.
Sure. Commissioner Ransom, let me take a stab at that. I will also call upon Liz Young for that. Having been involved in some of the earlier work, both with the level 2 study and the work with the two commissions, I can say that there are some trade-offs here. So the analysis of how these toll rates are structured looks at how the traffic varies by time of day, but it also focuses on having a schedule that is predictable and understandable. So if we had, say, a dozen steps in that toll schedule to kind of perfectly tailor the toll rates around the traffic, it would be something that would be hard for the traveling public to remember. So we try to keep the number of steps to maybe 3 or 4 steps on a weekday and 2 or 3 steps on a weekend, so that people can kind of get a sense of, this is the low toll rate time of day, this is the peak time of day, and this is kind of the midday or the middle toll rate schedule. So Liz, do you have other more technical observations to add to that?
No, I would add that the rates analyzed in this particular study that were recommended by the commissions were built off of several rounds of previous study and were refined at different points in time. The rates were not chosen at the penny level detail that is shown here. The slide prior to this that shows everything in 2026 dollars shows much rounder numbers, which is what had been discussed as easier numbers to talk about. But with the built-in escalation, those numbers do change annually. Some agencies adopt a policy to round to the nearest nickel. That's less common with electronic tolling now, but some of those are customizable, and there's been a long history of different analyses that were done here that kind of informed where these rates were headed, but that the commission can continue to review and suggest changes to those if that were something they wanted to discuss further.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, if I might just follow on. So between slides 25 and 26, I was able to make the jump from slide 25 being the schedule that was used for analysis at the point in time, $26 to the 2028 rates. And so, Liz, as you just observed, the penny, when I look at the rates on the 26th slide, the actual sort of model of rates, those have been inflated up from what we see in the table. And I was able to make that step. I also hear from the public the question of transparency and visibility. I reinterpret that to be easy to understand. So I think as we go forward, we want to be mindful of, I had to make that step myself. And I think, it's conveyed here clearly with the header what this proposal is as a concept. But I think these nuances are important. So I think for the team, just be mindful of how people make those leaps from table to actual scenario. Thank you.
Commissioner Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of questions. Liz, when you were talking about collecting the data and analyzing the data, you mentioned the sources of the data, and then you talked about exercising judgment when analyzing the data. Can you give us a couple of examples where you use judgment to override what you were seeing in the data?
It's not necessarily that we overrode data. It's sometimes the data sources do not all agree, and that is a flag to investigate a little bit further and see if you can identify what was going on that day. All methods of data collection have their own built-in level of error. There are different types of errors that can come into the data collection process, whether it's an equipment failure that something went offline for a little while, or a manual error in the processing. So there's a lot of different recognized variability in the data. So we work to look at the data comprehensively and work with that data to recognize where things may or may not have a little bit more, for lack of a better word, reliability, and use that in our processing.
Okay. The second is we heard from a couple of the presenters about this being the first phase, and we've got some money that has been set aside, and we're anticipating tolling. But is there any further anticipation, or did you do any work for additional phases, and whether or not tolling would be a part of funding for the additional unfunded phases?
So I think I'll take that question, Commissioner Baker. I believe that the toll analysis is really focused on what is a reasonable amount of funds to come to the program. These are all dedicated to the replacement bridge itself. And so at this time, it is not being contemplated sort of additional tolls to fund future phases. That may come into conversation at some point, but at this point, we're focused on this set of toll rates, and this is what they can support based on the costs that we see for the program. So this is really a, specifically related to the bridge itself.
To the projects that we've defined in that 5.65
That's
million
correct.
piece, and also known as the core.
So the 5.68 is actually a first phase of the core set of projects, because the core set of projects does include that extension of light rail, and there are additional funds needed to, both through the federal government and elsewhere, to support that actual operating extension.
But those are not funded at this point. So again,
That's
just
correct.
so I'm clear, this tolling is for the first phase, the 5.65 billion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. It's for the first phase, and that is the first phase of the core set of projects, which is larger. So just the first step.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Vice Chair Rasucci. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the presentations this morning. I want to make sure everyone heard that, what we heard from the public this morning was important for me. Given the testimony we heard this morning from the public, what level of confidence do we have in the level 3 traffic forecasts, given the stated uncertainty in future travel behavior? And then anyone can answer that.
So I guess I would note that Stantec has a rich history of doing this work, and as Liz was speaking through the analysis that they do and the rigor that both in data collection, review, and the body of work, we have strong confidence in that. We also know that their work in context of other programs has had strong confidence. So there's billions of dollars of work that have advanced based on their support of level 3 analyses and other programs and projects. So I don't know if Liz or Brent want to add anything to that, but I think this is there's both industry standard and also a strong track record by the company that is the expert in doing this work.
Thank you.
Okay. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. We're going to keep moving. We're a little bit behind on our agenda, but next we're going to hear from our debt managers and the officials in both states to kind of talk us through the financing.
All right, well, good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Jason Richter, and I'm a deputy state treasurer here in the state of Washington. And we're going to go through an overview of the toll funding analysis here for the project as it stands today. So what were we asked to do? The Washington State Treasurer's Office and the Oregon financing team, which is their ODOT staff and Treasury office, were asked to take toll scenario 2 and, in short, see if we could fund project funding case 2, which asked for $1.5 billion of project funds between 2029 and 2036. Now, this scenario assumes pre-completion tolling starting in 2029, so that's when the revenue starts. And in terms of the borrowing structure, what we assumed is what we know that we can do, which is the use of high-grade state-backed bonds, which for the state of Washington, we call that our triple pledge bonds. For the state of Oregon, that would look like toll revenue bonds backed by the State Highway Fund. We're also exploring the use of something called a TIFIA loan, which is a loan arrangement through the Federal Highway Administration. Now, one of the things I'll note with the funding analysis is this is it's a work in progress. It's a partnership through the Office of the State Treasurer here in Washington and our colleagues in Oregon. Both states issue bonds a little bit differently. We're starting with what we know we can, and this is going to evolve over time as we go through a TIFIA application process. And it's going to be a coordinated effort that has a number of details that we have to hammer out over time. With that said, let's go to the next page and talk a little bit about our starting point here. And this is a graphical representation of our gross toll revenues. That's the amount of tolls that are collected or projected to be collected on the project. And that's shown in the dotted lines. And then from that, we have to take out things like our operating costs and collection costs. And then that gives us the net toll revenues. And that's really what we can use for financing the project. And that's shown in the solid lines. And for a little bit of a reference, we started with the data that we had in 2022. And then we move that to the data that, and we compare that against the data that we have for 2026. And I think what we can see is there's been a slight decrease in the projected toll revenue that we have in the corridor with the refined projections. Let's go ahead and go to the next page, please. So where does the money go? We wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about where do toll revenues go? So first we start with gross toll revenues, and that's the money that's collected in the corridor. And from gross toll revenues, we have to take out, we have to pay for things like uncollected tolls, bank card fees, toll collection costs, and the operation and maintenance costs of the facility. That brings us to our net toll revenue. After net toll revenue, we go to the waterfall that we see on the right. And this is kind of the preliminary structure that we're assuming. And this is based on the work that the state of Washington has done for several years with our 520 corridor. Net toll revenue comes in, the first priority of payment, the first thing that gets paid is debt service cost. After that, we anticipate that we'll fund a repair and replacement reserve. That's the big picture reserve that's for periodic high cost replacement and repair items on the bridge. After that, we anticipate funding a revenue stabilization account. That's kind of the savings account for unexpected costs, unexpected toll deficiencies, the emergency reserve that we have for the facility. After that, we expect to fund a working capital reserve. There may be self-insurance that's funded in this project. And then after that, we've got a pay-go account where we anticipate that we'll use toll revenues to fund portions of the project. Let's go to the next page here. How will we for the project? So right now, we know that we can issue state-backed bonds. And what we've assumed for our analysis is a 50-50 split. Washington would issue triple pledge bonds in this assumption. Oregon would issue toll revenue bonds backed by their state highway fund. The financing term for each could be up to 30 years. One of the downsides is this approach does reduce the state of Washington and Oregon's debt capacity. The interest costs for these would be fixed rate bonds determined by the market. The benefit to this approach is we know we can do it. It's a lower administrative burden and cost of issuance compared to a TIFIA structure. And at the bottom, we show the debt service rate covenants that we've assumed for our model. Like I mentioned earlier, we're working on a TIFIA application process. And TIFIA, again, is a loan that's offered through the Federal Highway Administration. It's a non-recourse loan, that's what we're assuming, and that means that it would be supported by toll revenues with no backstop, no pledge from the state of Washington or Oregon. The financing term can be up to 35 years after the substantial completion of the project. There's no impact to either state's debt capacity if we're able to issue this as a standalone revenue loan. The interest cost is fixed. It's an interest rate equal to the 30-year Treasury rate. One of the advantages that can be closed in advance of drawing on the loan, and that provides rate lock and interest rate certainty. There's a lot of advantages to TIFIA. One, it can be structured with flexible loan repayment terms. It can be drawn down as needed, so debt's only incurred as expenditures are made, reducing interest costs in the early years. And, not impacting state's debt capacity is attractive. Like I said, we have to go through an application process here. So our analysis today really looks at the state tollback bonds with TIFI as something we'll work at over time. All right, so to kind of get to the punchline here on the next page, based on the assumptions here, state tollback bonds or TIFIA loans, we find that we are successfully able, through a combination of bond proceeds or loan proceeds and PAYGO funding, we're able to fund 100% of this request of $1.5 billion. The state tollback bonds approach has a little bit lower coverage. We're a little bit tighter in our capacity there. The TIFIA loan approach has a little bit more generous coverage. We have a little bit more room to maneuver there. So to go into a little bit of details, but not too much because we can really get mired in the details of the bond analysis, let's go ahead and go to the next page. Our toll-backed approach assumes that we issue 4 series of bonds, the first in 2030, the last in 2035. We're funding 82% of this $1.5 billion through bond proceeds. We're funding the balance with PAYGO. What is PAYGO? It's using toll revenues to directly fund project costs. One of the advantages of PAYGO is that PAYGO doesn't have an interest component. It helps us get to that $1.5 billion without having to fund interest. The downside of PAYGO is that it's a little bit more susceptible to toll revenues not meeting projection. There's no coverage there, and that can be something we'll have to keep an eye on. On the next page, we've got a graphical representation of what this looks like over time. The gold line on top is our gross toll revenue, net toll revenue. The black line on top shows the revenue at this 130 times debt service coverage level. Below that, we're paying our debt service costs. That's the blue bars, the purple bar, and the bronze bar on the bottom. Other things we have to pay: repair and replacement costs. In the early years, we're paying PAYGO, working capital deposit in our revenue stabilization account. So I think some of the things that I'll point out here is one of the commissioners asked, what happens if we have more toll revenue in the early year? What happens if we have more toll revenue in later years? I'd point out that I think I would encourage people to look at this like starting a business. There's a product that's traveling across the bridge. That product brings in revenue, toll revenue, and that business model has expenditures. The early years of this new business model are the tightest. What we're showing here is that through the construction phase to 2036, we're essentially spending everything that's coming in. We're spending all of the toll revenue on either funding these various deposits, on debt service, or using it for PAYGO funding. We have a bit of capacity to maneuver if revenues come in less than projected, but not much. So revenue in the early years, especially through this construction phase, are the most precious revenues that we have. If we go ahead and go to the next page, this is really similar, but this is a graphical representation of the TIFIA scenario. It's by all major representations very similar, almost identical to the state tollback bond scenario, except that we do have a little bit more capacity. If we look at the next page, can we go to the next page? Thank you. Because of the drawdown feature of this and the flexible structuring, we have a little bit more room in the early years. That gives us a little bit more capacity to absorb unexpected shortages in toll revenues, and it gives us a little bit more room on the long end between the debt service costs we have to cover in our net toll revenue projections. Again, this is an application process to get to a TIFIA loan that we'll have to go through with the Federal Highway Administration process. It's an attractive project for them, but we have no guarantee of success. But in any case, that's something that the state of Washington and the state of Oregon will be working on in the coming months and years to see what we can do there. I guess in closing, if we go to the last page, the timeline page, big picture milestones that we have in this financing analysis are, we anticipate that we will begin this TIFIA application process in fiscal year 2027, next year. Pre-completion tolling is scheduled to start in 2029. The start of construction is scheduled to start in 2029. And debt is projected to be issued in 2030, 33, 34, and 35 if we go with state tollback bonds. If we're successful with TIFIA, the first TIFIA draw is anticipated in 2031, with the bridge being finished approximately in 2035. So I hope that's a helpful overview. I'd be happy to discuss any questions that the group might have.
Commissioner Tarleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jason, and all of the team who have done so much incredible work to get us to this stage. I have a couple of very specific questions related to the state-backed bonds versus TIFIA loan strategy, Jason. Are there any particular benefits or disadvantages to pursuing a combination of using state-backed bonds and a TIFIA loan as a consideration for how to generate the amount of debt servicing that we're able to take on? And related to that is, if we do a TIFIA loan approach, does it affect our ability to compete for other federal dollars for any part of the project? Would you deduct the amount we would get for the loan from future Federal Highway Administration funding, or would it not have any effect at all?
Yeah, that's an interesting set of questions, and I'm glad you asked those, Commissioner Tarleton. If we could just kind of flip back one page in the slide deck. I don't believe that successfully receiving a TIFIA loan would impact grant applications. My understanding is that's not the case, but if others have an angle on that, I'd be happy to hear, but that's not my understanding.
Okay.
I think in Jason Richter's perfect world, we would receive a TIFIA loan for 100% of the need. That's what I think would be the most efficient, elegant solution for a number of reasons. One, Washington and Oregon issue debt differently. And I think there could always be a little bit of an interesting coupling there. Different ratings, different approaches, different interest rates, a decision about, where does the money go? If both states issue their own debt, it complicates the arrangement. It complicates the relationship. It complicates the flow of money because we have to make sure that both states are taken care of. If we have a TIFIA loan and we're successful in structuring it as a standalone toll revenue TIFIA loan, then there's an IBR loan. Then the business model is constrained to IBR tolls, IBR operational cost, IBR debt. And I think that would, in my opinion, make the administration over the next 40 years a lot more streamlined and simple. Then we don't have to worry about payments to Washington, payments to Oregon. We don't have to worry about timing differences or other considerations because there's just the loan on the facility. And I think that's the simplest, most elegant, and most equitable solution for everybody involved. And then I think, we can get into a little bit more complicated line of thought here. Washington can issue triple pledge bonds. Oregon can issue its highway fund backed toll revenue bonds. But that does have an impact on each state's debt capacity and ability to tackle other projects outside of the IBR. And I think we want to be sensitive to that because when you get into the details, I think that is a concern. We know we can do these structures. That's why we're leading with this, to show the certainty that we can do this. But I think if we are successful with TIFIA, I think that will help resolve and address concerns about, boy, does this take away Washington or Oregon's ability to tackle a project separate from the IBR? And I want to make sure we're thinking about that and respecting the thoughts and concerns there for both states.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ransom?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, thank you for your report. I've read the memo that was distributed, and I understand that your analysis and ODOT Debt Management Division analysis is point in time, and that point in time was this spring.
Mm-hmm.
Also understand that your analysis was arm's length and that you're to offer an opinion of viability. And at this point in time, you're determining viability. Specific to a comment you made, which really I think provides me some peace of mind, which is the nature of increment and the increments going forward. So if you go to slide 48 specifically, maybe just a couple thoughts in terms of what you'll need to do, just in a nutshell. So your bond delivery schedule has 4 tranches of bonds to be sold, presumptively. Can you give me and the commission and those watching a sense of what reassessments you do at each point in time? Going forward, we're going to have to reassess. You're going to have to make a determination of viability, et cetera. Just how do the credit markets work with you and the expectation of that point in time based on the delivery schedule that you proposed?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. You know, I'll take a step back here. The state of Washington's kind of honed a process with our 520 system, and that's been in place, you know, I think since 2012. We've had the fortune or the misfortune of going through the pandemic with that system where revenues were severely impacted. We had the experience of addressing that, going through that. So I think that gives us a good bit of background on managing a system like this. And that's frankly kind of what we're using as our cornerstone when we're putting this together. So you were looking at the issuance schedule here. Let's 2030. Before we go to issuance, you know, one of the things that we're going to have to do jointly, Oregon and Washington, is prepare some type of master bond resolution that clearly states where the money's going. What's the priority of payment? What's the coverage requirement? What are our long-term covenants that we have to maintain here that either things are good or potentially puts us in a situation where toll rates need to be raised? So that's the master bond resolution that we would assume needs to be approved by both states well in advance of this. You know, about a year prior to that new issuance, 6 months or a year prior to that, we're going to need to receive an updated investment grade traffic and revenue forecast. So we're going to have to we're going to get on an annual cycle here where prior to issuance, we're going to see what's our updated TNR. What have actuals been? Are we on track? And hopefully, prior to issuing that first series, we have a year of actuals. We see that we're generally on track. We have the consultant's newest update. And with the single issuance, that still does leave us quite a bit of capacity. You know, it's a quarter of our issuance. We're not leveraging ourselves up to the maximum capacity. We're going to have projections. And in that master bond resolution, there's going to be something called an additional bonds test that we have to meet. We have to project that the revenue projections sufficiently meet a certain test. And each time we go to issue, we're going to have to go through this process again. We're going to have to look at historicals. We're going to have to get the updated traffic and revenue forecast. We're going to have to make sure that the numbers work, because our expectation, and it really needs to work, is that tolls are going to cover all these costs and that we're not going to have to draw on some other revenue stream, some other source of funding, and we're going to try to preserve that revenue stabilization account for anything other than an act of God, a pandemic, or something like that. So it's really a structured approach. We're taking a conservative approach up front. You know, the graph that we showed you, our debt service is level. We could do ascending debt service because that's what the revenue projections look like. I'm not going to do that. We want to have some bells and whistles and tools in our tool belt that if things need to be adjusted, we've got some room to adjust them down the road. So hopefully that gives you some comfort and answers your question.
Okay, at this point, if there's no more questions for Jason, we'll turn to Ethan and Ethan give us an overview.
Hi, Chair Brown, Chair Young. I'm Ethan Pendlebury, ODOT's Debt and Financial Analysis Program Manager. And I'm here today to give you a brief overview of Oregon's toll bonding analysis for this 1.5 billion. This analysis was contracted out to our municipal advisor, the Public Resource Advisory Group, otherwise known as PRAG. They are contracted by the Oregon State Treasury to advise ODOT when it comes to things like this, such as debt issuances and financial analysis around them. Next slide, please. But before getting into that, I want to just give a brief overview of how debt financing works in Oregon, as it is different from Washington. And that is first, before biennium starts, ODOT needs to request the bonding authority it plans to bond in the next biennium in the governor's budget. After it's in the governor's budget, the legislator needs to approve that bonding authority in the during session, typically what's called the biannual bond bill. Once that's been approved, ODOT has the authority to bond up to that maximum in the following biennium. So once that approval's, ODOT engages with Oregon Treasury to work on timing of, hey, when do we want to issue these bonds? How do we want to structure the bonds? And works them all the math behind the scenes to get these bonds issued. And then Oregon State Treasury issues these bonds on behalf of ODOT. Once the bonds have been issued, it's ODOT's responsibility to pay the debt service on these bonds and then also any reporting or post-sale requirements. Next slide, please. Getting into the analysis, I'm just going to cover some key assumptions that were used by PRAG. And that's a 5.5% interest rate. This is a bit higher than ODOT currently has seen in bonding, but really wanted to be conservative since we're bonding so far out. As well as the bonds would be backed by net toll revenue first and secondly by the State Highway Fund. Currently, Oregon does not back highway revenue bonds with the general fund, and there's not a plan to back them here. Same, a 1.3 times minimum toll coverage, the same toll rate scenario Washington used as a toll rate scenario 2, with a plan to issue 30-year bonds, but only 3 sales in our analysis in 2031, 2032, and 2033. And that bond proceeds would be used to fund a revenue stabilization account. Next slide, please. Here's a similar chart you just saw from Jason. The dashed line is the net toll revenue, while the solid gray line is that net revenue at a 1.3 times coverage. The blue would be PAYGO directly applied to construction, while the red, orange, and yellow and green are bond issuances and R&R. Oregon's analysis went, let's maximize the amount of PAYGO as much as above all else to go to construction. And this led to, not fully level debt service, but a wrapping of debt service, delaying some until construction is completed in 2037. This is not a guarantee of how Oregon will structure when it comes to sell. ODOT and Treasury are very flexible in what works best for the program and what works best for the state. Can I get to the next slide, please? So, the end result of this is the analysis found that toll scenario 2 can achieve the 1.5 billion requested in funding with 488 million in PAYGO applied directly and just over $1 billion in bonding, with an average coverage of 2.09 times and a minimum coverage of 1.38 in 2043. So that's just a quick overview of Oregon's analysis, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So questions for Ethan? Okay. Well, I appreciate both of you walking us through these different scenarios and have a lot to think about here, how we move forward. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and move forward, not too far behind here, to assessing the possible toll discounts and exemptions. And so we're going to hear from staff again to walk us through the analysis.
Thank you, Chair Brown. I was going to kick this off. I'm Carl C., Deputy Director for the State Transportation Commission. was going to kick off this section of the meeting with a review of the considerations that have been made by the commissions around discounts and exemptions, and then pass it to the analysis team to speak more to the tribal exemption and discount analysis that was undertaken separate from the traffic and revenue level 3 traffic and revenue study. So if we can go to the next slide, I could kick that off. As was referenced by Liz Orta in her presentation on the traffic and revenue analysis for the level 3 study, there has been assumptions around discounts and exemptions considered and incorporated into that work. And there is also the additional consideration of the exemption or discount for tribal member vehicles and tribal government vehicles that will be addressed in the presentation that is up next. As a point of review, one back, thanks. As a point of review, these are the considerations around discounts and exemptions were put forward by the commissions as we've been working to develop these scenarios and move them forward for analysis. They kind of fall into 3 separate categories that as we've been considering these. One is looking at exemptions or discounts in alignment with current state law and existing tribal toll preemptions. So this refers to the lack of exemptions being assumed for transit buses, rideshare vehicles, and private buses, which is in accordance with Washington state law for tolled bridges. Second, the exemption that must be provided to National Guard on official business as stated in Oregon state law, assuming that would be extended to Washington state law as a working assumption, or just say extended to Washington National Guard on official business as a working assumption. And then and then also including the tolling preemption for Yakima Indian Nation and Nez Perce tribe based on the treaty right of free travel. That is not a point of decision for the commissions. That is a element that will be moved forward, but wanted to acknowledge that as an existing preemption that exists for tolling in Washington state for all toll facilities, and is assumed that is being moved forward as part of the tolling for the I-5 bridge. Possible exemptions. Second, there's a group of possible exemptions under consideration, which are consistent with existing Washington state toll policy. This includes the exemptions for state maintenance vehicles working on the facility, tow trucks on the facility, school buses, as well as emergency vehicles. The intent to date would be to apply those exemptions in the same way as applied on other facilities in Washington. Currently, as the Washington State Commission is familiar with, we have established consistent policies across all facilities, toll facilities for those exemptions, and the thought is to extend that in the same way to the I-5 bridge. And finally, we have the consideration of the low-income discount, as was addressed by Liz Orta, and really looking at, as that is included in all 4 scenarios, really looking at the timing of when such a discount might take place, and acknowledging that we have currently assumed that as a 50% discount. And then separately from that, as will be addressed next, the discount or exemption for tribal member vehicles and tribal government vehicles. Those will not be subject to public input, but rather will be determined by the commissions after consultations with tribal governments. Those consultations are ongoing, underway, and so we will, in expectation that that is a process that will continue as you continue with your rate setting considerations. With that, unless there's any questions, I will pass this to Liz. I believe Liz will kick it off to speak to the analysis on the tribal toll discounts and exemptions.
Thank you, Carl. So we're going to take a few minutes now to go through an overview of the sensitivity analysis related to the tribal toll discounts and exemptions, as mentioned by Carl. So in this presentation, we're going to cover the direction that we received for these sensitivities, the outreach and data collection effort, the assumptions of the sensitivities, and a brief overview of the results. In addition, we're also going to talk about a few of the additional operational considerations for such a program. Next slide. So the 4 toll scenarios that we analyzed for the level 3 study and discussed earlier in this meeting do not assume potential tribal discounts or exemptions other than the 2 tribes with specific rights of free passage treaty language. The several sensitivity tests have been completed to assess the traffic and revenue impacts of tribal discounts or exemptions and to support decision-making by the 2 state transportation commissions. The process for the tribal consultation or any considerations of these discounts or exemptions, as Carl mentioned, will be determined jointly by the commissions. Next slide. So the sensitivity direction that was provided by the Bi-State Tolling Subcommittee included 2 options for eligibility for a tribal discount or exemption. Option A, which we'll refer to as limited eligibility, will include the 10 tribes who are federally recognized, have an identified connection with the IBR program area, and are consulting with the IBR program through the NEPA and the National Historic Preservation Act. We're also looking at a second option, option B, which we'll refer to as statewide, which expands the eligibility to 38 tribes with a connection to the IBR program area. Along with the eligibility options, A and B, the subcommittee also recommended that the analysis consider 2 tribal discount or exemption alternatives for each of these options. And that includes a 50% toll discount, which is consistent with the other discount programs being included in the base scenarios, and a 100% toll discount, which is a full toll exemption. So altogether, there's a total of 4 sensitivities that we will be reviewing today. Option A with a 50% or 100% discount, and option B with a 50% or a 100% toll discount. Next slide. This slide has a lot on it. Not expecting everyone to be able to read through all of it, but it is listing out the tribes that were considered eligible in option A and the additional tribes that were eligible in option B. So this is available as part of the presentation, but we can move to the next slide, please. The sensitivity analysis assumes that the toll discounts or exemptions would apply only to tribal member-owned vehicles or tribal government-owned vehicles that have a good-to-go account in good standing and have used a good-to-go a transponder. Tribal member-owned vehicles or tribal government vehicles also need to be enrolled in the program. Next slide. There is not a lot of data available specific to tribal travel in the Portland area, the Portland metro area, and specifically across the Columbia River. An outreach effort was conducted working with both commissions and the IBR program, and a letter was sent out to the 10 consulting tribes requesting some additional information to help guide this sensitivity analysis. We did receive data back from 3 tribes, including the Nez Perce tribe, the Confederate Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation, and the Cowlitz Indian tribe. For other tribes, Stantec gathered publicly available information, such as the size of tribal membership and general location from official tribe websites where possible. Stantec applied the information that we received from the 3 tribes specifically as a general guide to inform some of the assumptions about driving population or for the other tribes considered in this analysis. And there's a snippet here that shows the types of questions that we tried to gather some additional information on, such as number of enrolled members in the different tribes and how many might reside in the Portland, Vancouver metro area, what share of the tribal membership is of driving age, and so on. Next slide. The analysis was informed by the different data that we were able to process that we received from the tribes and supplemented with that publicly available data. It was assumed for this analysis that a tribal toll discount or exemption for these sensitivity scenarios would be assumed to start on day 1 with pre-completion tolling. It was also assumed that a participation rate of 60% of eligible members would opt into the program. Again, consistent with the other discount program assumptions. There's not a lot of data specific to how tribal members might participate and sign up. So we're using that generalized enrollment assumption. On the left here, we have a slight diagram that walks through some of the steps of our process. We worked to identify how many members of tribes would be eligible under options A and option B, what share of those tribal members might live in Oregon and Washington, and furthermore in the metro area, what share of the residents in the area might be of driving age, crossing the Columbia River, and own a car. We did assume that 100% of them own a car to be conservative. The results of this analysis indicate that for all 4 sensitivities, less than 1% of I-5 bridge traffic is expected to be participating in such a toll discount program. This is consistent with findings of a previous investigation conducted by ODOT, that it was also on the order of 1% or less of I-5 traffic crossing the Columbia River. Next slide. To put this in context, this table is showing for the 4 sensitivities, we have the 2 options. On the top here, the 10 tribes and the 38 tribes, which were the limited or the statewide, and the 2 discount options, 50% or 100%. For all 4 of these, again, the result was less than 1% of I-5 transactions. But what does that mean? Over the course of a year, we picked fiscal year 2036, which is the first year that the new bridge is open and operating in our assumptions, that for a 50% discount with the limited eligibility, we'd be looking at about 180,000 trips per year making use of this discount. And for the wider eligibility and the 100% toll discount, that number would be more like 400,000, so a little bit shy of 500,000. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand this over to Brent Baker to talk through the net revenue adjustments for the tribal sensitivities.
Thank you, Liz, and greetings again. So recall the earlier presentation where we talked about the waterfall of from getting from gross toll revenue potential to adjusted gross toll revenues, those revenues collected, and then to the net toll revenues that are required for the financing. So there are some additional administrative costs that need to be taken into consideration here. So I want to just kind of go over the assumptions that we used in this sensitivity analysis to analyze the effects or impacts of these tribal discounts. So first of all, we do assume that any startup costs for the exemption program, including any complementary transponders that would be distributed, are covered in sort of the capital costs of implementing tolling, so they're not affecting the net revenue stream. And I mentioned the transponders because we are assuming, as Liz mentioned, you need to have an account to get the benefit of a discount or an exemption as being a tribal member. Yeah, that's the key way in which the customer service center will identify that trip as being eligible for the benefit. So for purposes of our net revenue analysis and the tribal discounts and exemptions sensitivity test, we did look at the toll collection costs that would continue to apply. So essentially, there are sort of costs on a transaction basis for collecting tolls, and whether you're collecting a 0 toll, a 50% discount toll, or the full toll, those costs still apply. So those are factored into the analysis. In addition, there is assumed to be some additional staffing costs required to administer the discount or exemption program. This would be in addition to any staff that are currently might be assumed for managing a low income program. So there would be some incremental level of costs with managing that and having customer service center representatives being able to oversee that program and its benefits. Similarly, there would be some ongoing transponder purchase and inventory costs, costs acquiring transponders over time, assuming that complementary transponders would be provided to tribal members over the course of the forecast period here that we're looking at. Again, initially, those costs were assumed to be capitalized, but ongoing, they would be an operational cost. There are also a slight reduction in credit card fee costs because there would be lower revenue collection with a tribal discount or exemption program in place. That's a pretty minor cost sort of offset to the other things that are sort of additional costs. I think the bottom line here is that all other costs associated with tolling and bridge operations, including fixed costs for toll equipment, the insurance premiums if we have them, and facility maintenance remain unchanged in our analysis. So the next slide sort of covers what those net revenue impacts would be. And again, we're looking at this for the purposes of the sensitivity test. We zeroed in on fiscal year 36, which starts in the summer of 2035. That is when the new bridge would be open. So the amounts shown here would be a bit less prior to that and could be a little bit more at least in dollar values, as toll revenue grows over time with traffic and escalation in toll rates. What we're seeing here, though, are some pretty minor impacts. So of the 4 cases that we looked at here, and this is again results for scenario 2, which has kind of been the focus here, the one that is representative of scenarios 1, 2, and 3 that gets us that 1.5 billion we heard earlier. A 50% discount with the 10 tribes that have been consulting with the IBR program. That would be an approximately $400,000 drop in net revenue. So there's a drop in gross revenue. There's also additional administrative costs of administering the program, as we mentioned. So the net effect is about a $400,000 drop in net revenue in that representative year. That's about 0.3% of the net revenue in fiscal year 2036. And then if you kind of step into that, if you go from 50% toll discount to a full exemption, that number jumps up to about 850,000 with the 10 tribes that are currently have been consulting with the program. And then if we broaden this to the 38 tribes with a connection to the program area at the 50% discount level, that cost implication on net revenue goes up to about 700,000, 710,000 a year, and then in 2036, and then if we assume that is a full exemption, it goes up to about 1.5 million per year, which is about 1.3% of our net toll revenues. And again, the dollar values of that will be a little bit less when we start pre-completion tolling because toll rates and traffic levels are slightly lower then, and then the dollar value of that net revenue impact would grow a little bit over time. So at this point now, I'm going to turn it over to Ed Berry at the WashDOT Toll Division, who's going to talk a little bit more about operational considerations.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure to be with all of you once again. I'm going to go through some of these operational considerations and some takeaways from what we heard about these tribal discounts. So operationally, in order to qualify for a discount or an exemption for this program, the customer or the tribal member must open a good-to-go account and install a pass in their vehicle and provide 2 pieces of information to our customer service center to receive this discount or exemption for the IBR. And that is vehicle registration showing the vehicle is owned by a tribal member and tribal membership information. The assumption is that customers would still pay tolls on the other good-to-go facilities if they happen to travel on them. WashDOT would be responsible for verifying this eligibility. And again, tribal members would establish their own good to go accounts with payment information. The tribal government would be responsible for managing their good to go account for their fleets, including reviewing and disputing transactions if those happen to come up. Next slide, please. It puts the responsibility on the individual tribal members to provide that documentation and credit card information. It requires the tribal governments to manage their accounts and fleets, review their invoices, and pay or dispute outstanding tolls on a monthly basis. If a pass is not detected for some reason, then a vehicle still may be charged, and even though they are discounted or exempt. So just to acknowledge that this will result in some tribal government having to work with us at Good to Go to dispute and resolve these charges as they might happen. It could result in complaints that the process is complicated and in some instances result in members receiving charges. So we would work with the affected tribe or tribal member to resolve those if they come up. What does that result in? Well, it's time and process in managing these, and it's a manual process that would require additional staffing and consideration to make sure that we have adequate staff that's adequately trained to administer the program. And of course, it would require detailed work with each tribal nation to make sure everybody understands how it would be administered and how we stay well communicated on a monthly basis to make sure the discounts or exemptions are administered appropriately. Next slide. So some key takeaways. So as Liz mentioned, they indicate the number of eligible tribal members is less than 1% on the daily traffic on the bridge. Additional costs evaluated in the net revenue include additional staffing that I spoke to, complementary transponders that Brent spoke to, and collection costs attributed to administering this program. The overall impact to the net revenues is estimated to be less than 1.5%. This analysis is focused on IBR only. It's an important point and does not necessarily analyze the financial impacts on other toll facilities. And the estimated magnitude studied in this sensitivity may not be transferable to other toll facilities. And it provides an order of magnitude for potential financial impacts, but it's not precise due to a lot of things, as Liz mentioned, in the challenges with the data and the multiple possibility of unknown factors, including the number of members and tribes and the frequency of they travel and the amount of enrollment, and those details in administration and participation. Questions remain. Further study would needed to fully assess the impact and the risks associated with this. I will also add that we had conversation and consultation with the Cowlitz yesterday. They saw the same presentation. There was a good conversation around some of the things that we show here, particularly around the volumes associated with this sensitivity. There was questions and concerns about that perhaps some of these volumes were overstated. And there was also interest about the detail about some of the administration assumptions that I just put forth. So overall, I thought it was a good conversation in getting this information to the Cowlitz who are definitely interested in this. So with that, I think that is my last slide.
At this point, is there any questions about this before we move on to discussion? Commissioner Chang.
I really appreciate the discussion of providing this benefit. I think it's this discount benefit. I think it's an important thing to consider. I'm very concerned about the administrative costs when you're spending almost as much money to administer a benefit as the benefit you're providing, right? Like, so basically, if you're offering tribal members a benefit, but it costs you just as much money to administer that benefit, I just wonder if there's another way to do that. You know, maybe if we could think about it as this is not a benefit that we want to surgically track, to a specific tribal member receiving a benefit, but like we just provide a benefit to 10 recognized tribes, and they figure out how they distribute that benefit. I'm wondering if we could do something as simple as just provide a certain amount of vouchers to each of the tribes that we want to recognize with this benefit, and let them do all the tracking and determining who gets the benefit, how they're going to receive the voucher, et cetera, et cetera. Because I mean, if I was tracking the numbers correctly, the administrative burden might basically double the amount of revenue lost, and that just seems it seems very inefficient.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Chang. Those are very, very astute comments there. Yes, there is an administrative cost here and an administrative consideration that we're trying to estimate here, given the challenges with some of the data. Some of your suggestions I think are interesting, and we will consider. But yes, we're drawing these conclusions based on some of the work that our team already does with some of our exemptions and discounts. And interest in trying to keep and make sure that some of the customers that are expecting discounts and exemptions get what they signed up for. There's also consideration of people who actually do get a bill that maybe think they shouldn't. They will call the call center. There'll be an administrative cost to that, and other challenges with customer service if it's not crystal clear where the lines are. So, but I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Hey, if there isn't any other questions, we're going to move on to a conversation, our discussions and our next steps, and we're going to turn it over to staff. But I just want to remind everyone that we do have our bi-state toll subcommittees who will be working on this issue and coming back to our commissions in addition to what the commission discussion. So let's move on in to the next discussion and next steps.
Thank you, Chair Brown, and I appreciate that reference to the bi-state tolling subcommittee. I have a few slides here to inform a discussion, but I also recognize the time we're at 11:35. And do want to focus on the discussion itself. So I will want to touch on a couple slides, but then really turn to some potential direction from the commission as to guidance, for example, on how to the bi-state tolling subcommittee on follow-up. So with that, let me go first. As a reminder, and this might be more of a reminder for some of you commissioners, and some that might be more newer information based on how long you've been with the commissions. But the legislative direction on IBR toll rates in each state is distinct, though overlapping. A summary of the Washington state requirements for IBR tolling includes authorizing tolling on the existing and replacement I-5 bridges as is planned. Toll revenues must be spent on construction, maintenance, and operation of the IBR toll facility and not subsidize other Washington or Oregon toll facilities. Again, this is consistent with how it's approached for other facilities in Washington state. In the case that there is an Oregon tolling system set up, toll revenue may not pay for all of the operational and administrative costs of such a system. It is intended to be focused here again on the IBR facility. It prohibits tolls on the Washington portion of Interstate 205. A comment that referring back really to the comments you heard today, that remains a point of controversy, but certainly this is the direction from the state legislature to not have tolling on the Washington portion of I-205. And then finally, toll rates may not exceed the highest toll rate allowed in other Washington toll facilities. Not really a factor as we look at those initial rates, but something we need to have in mind. Oregon requirements for tolling, for IBR tolling, are subject to the Oregon general tolling requirements in ORS 383. If there's questions on that or follow-up, Travis Brower can speak to that. But there's no specific requirements this time to IBR in Oregon statute, but there are the more general requirements that it is that remains subject to. So briefly, how did we get a reminder of how we as the commissions, you as commissions, got to these level 3 toll scenarios that were put forward for analysis by the commissions in October of 2024. As a reminder, these scenarios resulted after consideration of or development of 10 toll scenarios for the level 2 traffic and revenue analysis, which became the basis for defining these 4 scenarios. The public deliberation by the commissions resulted in honing these down from those 10 scenarios that had been identified by the commissions down to these 4 that were advanced for the level 3 investment grade analysis. The selection of those these toll scenarios, including the different elements and alternatives, were for both the level 2 and level 3 analysis. Really, we're based on the capacity to support funding and the bridge or the project and also meeting performance objectives, along with alignment with toll rate and policy objectives that the commissions discussed and as in part directed by the legislatures of each state, but also some further objectives that were identified by the commissions. And finally, the development and approval were informed by additional conversations with IBR advisory groups as this was being considered, as well as public comment during the bi-state and full commission meetings. So with that background, this slide really is meant to tee up a conversation. There was, I don't need to say, there was a lot of information shared today in those analysis presentations, very, very current and direct and informative on what next steps you may wish to take as you advance your consideration, or as you seek to have information in order to advance your consideration of toll rate options, toll rate scenarios for public consideration late this year or into next year. So really wanted a few topics I think to consider for feedback today. One, any feedback on the 4 toll scenarios, including scenarios and elements that may be preferred for further consideration. And then importantly, as Chair Brown referenced, guidance for our bi-state tolling subcommittee for further review and recommendations regarding toll rate scenarios that would be then forwarded to the full commissions. Any consideration, determination around further analysis that may be supportive within the scope of the 4 toll scenarios that have been put forward. And also determining recommendations on proposed toll rates and policies, and also an approach for the public outreach process. That public outreach process that's been under development by staff and with review by the commissions for some time, but certainly more to hone in on as we move closer to when that process will take place. And then finally, direction, if it's the interest of the commissions here, to reconvene the full commissions late in this year, early next year, for that reporting out by the bi-state tolling subcommittee and decision-making on advancing a potential toll rate and policy proposal. So I'm happy to pause there. We do have some next step milestones and an overview of the rate setting process that we have slides on. But if it's, and I can touch on those now, but I think really we wanted to facilitate discussion around those topics and potential guidance on that proposed direction for further consideration slide.
Thank you, Carl. I'm not sure what the rest of the commission is thinking at this moment, but is there anybody that wants to give comment to these further considerations, or do we want to jump into looking at what the milestones are and what our next steps are? Commissioner Tarleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to let you know how much I appreciate your leadership through this meeting. This has been an extraordinary amount of information and feedback from the public. And this is my first meeting as a commissioner to address the Oregon-Washington bi-state discussions on the bridge. I just told Rima and Chair Young that I have to leave the meeting in the next 10 minutes. And so I just wanted to thank you and let you know whatever direction the whole body wants to take on guidance. I'm fully in support of whichever approach you want to take. I would only offer that I would like us to explore from the financing side a more detailed discussion of the relative benefits or disadvantages of approaching the financing through 100% through the TIFIA loan, as Jason Richter recommended, or the advantages of each state doing state-backed loans, or what the potential risks are for our respective states' debt capacity. That's what I am most interested in. I'll leave it up to all of those who have worked the toll rate scenarios to figure out which direction we really want to give to our respective teams. But thank you again to everybody. I have really learned a lot.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. You know, as I'm sitting here thinking about this, and we have been given a lot of information, and we're trying to digest it. And I think that none of us have really firm answers as to which direction we want to go on any of this. And I know that we'll be working with our own independent commissions to talk about this. But I think one of the things that just in the tolling piece that kind of stuck out to me is that Washington has a lot at stake here as far as making decisions on what exemptions are given. And that is because it impacts their entire state and their tolling system, where Oregon doesn't have that system in place. And so when we make decisions, it can hurt Washington. We have to take everything into consideration. So I'm really thankful that that was shown to us. That it's very, very clear. But I'm going to pause now, and Commissioner Ransom.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Like Commissioner Tarleton, I joined the commission late last fall, so I think this is the first opportunity, at least in this forum, that I've had to review this material. I followed it sort of professionally in the background, but not at this level of detail. In the interest of just disclosure, I've been assigned to the bi-state subcommittee, so I will keep my comments brief here. But directionally, I would like to see further refinement and build out of other scenarios based on the principle of scenario 2. And here's the principle that I want to flag. It's really the pre and post toll sequence. Being for years a bi-state commuter, somebody in my household is currently a bi-state commuter, and I've commuted both sides, north to south and south to north. I'm hyper aware of the commute on both corridors, hyper aware of the circumstance of change and impact and the concerns and interests associated with that. I think those of us within this region share those concerns. But I think the principle of pre and post, when I think about a long-term construction period to get to the bridge completion, really addresses, I think, not fully, but at least contemplates the notion that the conditions will be different pre and post. So to the extent the team can build out further scenarios or refinements within that framework, I think I'd like to see that. And I think constituents here would the same.
Thank you. Other comments from commissioners? I think we all agree with you. Commissioner Chang, are you looking for your unmute button, or I saw you move around, so I wasn't sure. No, okay. With that said, I think I'm going to turn to Chair Young, and just as a process here, I think that for us on our bi-state subcommittee, we have Vice Chair Byer and Commissioner Baker, who represent our commission. And I know that it's been kind of slow. We've kind of paused the meetings, but it's going to start picking up now at this point, and we'll be discussing this more. And so I guess it's a process. Does the rest of the commission feel like we should move forward with some other scenarios, or kick it off to the bi-state and have them come up with some recommendations to us?
Yeah.
Well, I would look to see if any of our commissioners have any feelings about that. I totally agree with you, Chair Brown. It's been a lot of information. I don't feel like I have any really specific suggestions. I did note that Jason only really analyzed the sufficiency of scenario 2. So I think I would like to hear that the other scenarios, if we're moving them forward, are also looked at for sufficiency. And also, I'd just like to have us commit to come back together as both commissions toward the end of this year or early next year to make some choices about what we're going to advance for public comment. Do any commissioners from Washington or Oregon see any outliers, any scenarios that we haven't analyzed, any expansion, or have we bracketed the appropriate toll scenarios? A lot of work's been done on this by our bi-state committee, and I really appreciate that and trust the judgment of the work that they've done so far. But it would be good to have, if anyone has any disagreement, this would be the time to let us know.
I think one of the things I will agree with you, after just going through all of the information, I would hope that we'll meet sooner than later, because we have a lot of work and we're on a pretty tight timeline. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the comments. As the co-chair for the bi-state subcommittee, tolling subcommittee, with Commissioner Lee Byer, we've done a lot of work on that subcommittee, making recommendations to the full commission. I don't want us weigh in so much as to say, hey, this is what we recommended. We're kind of agnostic in that aspect, in the sense that we'll go back and do whatever work the full commissions want us to do. I would agree with my chair in that scenario 2 is really the only one that I could even believe in at this point, and even that I'm not so sure that I believe in that one right now. There's a lot of questions here, and so I think there's just needs to be a lot more work done before we go in any direction. So, and I know staff doesn't want to hear that because they want to hear us make a decision, but at the same time, I want to make the most informed decision that I can for Washingtonians and for Oregonians. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, and thank you for your comment, because I think that's all of us. This weighs heavy. I mean, for these two commissions, we have big decisions in front of us that do impact people. And so we're hearing from the public also that, they're concerned. So I'm going to stop. I see Vice Chair Byer has his hand up.
Yeah, Madam Chair, a lot of information today. I think one thing I'd like to hear from the group, we've got 2 scenarios that would be helpful to hear some guidance on. One is the and Commissioner Chang raised it, the issue of the tribal discount or however we want to do that. And the other one, and probably one that I'm more interested in, is there a general sense of the body, both bodies, I guess, that we want to do the low income discount? That'd be helpful to have a sense of where we're at on that, since we've talked about it in the subcommittee a lot.
So I'm looking to see if anybody else wants to comment on that. I think that if we haven't run that scenario, we need to, well, I thought we did look at that scenario and it was less than 1%. Was that correct? On that one?
If I may offer a clarification, all 4 of the current scenarios do include a discount, the 50% discount, as a point that's been advanced as a policy direction from the commissions to this point. It's more a question of whether it happens with the current scenarios, whether it occurs when the new bridge opens in the mid 2030s, or does it happen as soon as practical? Current assumptions aligning that with the start of tolling on the current bridges. So that's the question the scenarios have pondered so far. I would say any shift away from a discount would be a different policy direction than the commissions have put forward so far.
And we should probably also say that, Washington is advancing consideration of a low-income toll discount for our entire system currently.
Okay.
So it would be consistent with the policy that we're looking at for the rest of the state.
Yeah.
Great. Right. Was somebody else going to speak? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Chang.
On the question of when to start the low income discount, I would support I would support moving forward with a low income discount, and B, on the question of whether to start it when tolling starts or after the bridge is underway. It seems to me, if we're trying to provide relief to low income people, that it should start sooner than later.
All right. Well,
can I ask a clarifying question, Commissioner Brown? Is that okay?
Sure.
From a staff. I hear the interest in assessing these scenarios further. Is it in terms of more scenarios? I know there are, without taking away from the interest and capacity to certainly review how to apply policy choices and further advanced consideration of, say, post-completion and pre-completion tolling. I would suggest perhaps that we defer whether that means new scenarios or further consideration of those scenarios on hand to the bi-state tolling subcommittee, in order to help ensure the kind of a deeper dive into how these different scenarios may, what more information we can really see from the current scenarios as we, for example, if there is a financial analysis done on 1 and 3, for example, which provides some more options. But that's a friendly amendment. I don't know if Commissioner Ransom, I don't want to take away from your interest, and I just putting that forward. There are considerations to be done for more scenarios versus other analysis that may still get to your important questions.
So, Chair Young, maybe what we should do, because there is so much more information, this is new to all of us, the slide deck. So if we can get copies of all the slide decks that were presented to us today, I think as commissioners, we can go back as each commission and look at those, have a week or so to look at those. I know our commission is meeting next week. And we can sit down, and if we think that there's something that we need to push forward to the subcommittee, and then maybe have the chairs and vice chair meet briefly in a meeting from both states and just kind of present what we think we need to move forward, or instruction to the subcommittee and then we can go from there. Does that sound like a plan?
That sounds like a good idea. I think it gives people time to digest the material a little bit, and we can give a little bit more direction to the Bi-State Committee.
Okay. And when are you meeting again as a
We're
commission?
meeting the week after next.
Okay, great. So I think the timing is just right on this, and that we can all sit down and figure out, because it has been a lot of information. And I think that we also had a lot of public comment that we want to think about, and give some good direction. I don't want to throw something out there and then have send the subcommittee and staff down a rabbit hole. So that said, at this point, I guess I will look to you if you have additional comments, or if you would like to ask your commissioners if they have comments. I think my commissioners have made their comments, but I may be wrong. I'm giving them a really short rope here.
Well, and I'll offer that opportunity. I think our commissioners have chimed in as they've had questions, but anyone who hasn't had a chance or has comments you'd like to make, now would be the time. Okay, thank you all for being here. Thank you for leading the meeting, Chair Brown. And we have, as you say, it's a big decision and we have a lot to think about.
Do. And then I'm going to ask do any of our commissioners from Oregon have any other comments that they'd like to make at this point? Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank the staff. I know this was a yeoman's amount of work for them to get all this together and to get it out to us and to have this meeting. I really appreciate their work. And I want to also thank everybody for being very respectful to each other and allowing different opinions to be brought forth. With that said, I look forward to our continued work, and I really look forward to next time passing the gavel to you and allowing you to be the presenter and the taking care of being the chair of the meeting. So thank you to everyone. With that said, I think we are going to adjourn, and we're right on time, which is great. I'm 1 minute early. This is my motto. Let's get it done in time. So thank you very much for everyone participating today.
Can I make one? Oh, I was going to make one note, if I could. There were some additional slides. It's your discretion on whether we touch on them or not.
I'm sorry.
And that's up. I'm not going to, you can decide on that. If we want to touch, if there's one slide to touch on, it would be the future base and milestones, just to make sure we're all on the same page on what those are. The following ones I could leave there for your information, or we could speak to them. Depends on your commissioners, on your preference. So
you had to mess up my timeline there.
I'm sorry. I really.
That's all right. Let's let's go to the milestones. Yes.
Okay.
Real quick. That's
great. I appreciate that, Chair Brown. This I wanted to touch on in part, make sure there is awareness on for each of you. And if there is any feedback on this, do let us know. Just noted, we started off with noting that today we did receive the level 3 traffic and revenue analysis and financial analysis on the results being shared. This summer through this upcoming winter, I think consistent with our conversation today, intent for follow-up consideration and analysis of toll rate and policy scenarios by both the Bi-State Tolling Subcommittee, and as that gets shaped into recommendations and further work, updates to the full commissions and potential further direction. That would, with the intent then, that would lead into work in the spring through summer of 27 on public engagement on toll rate and policy scenarios to inform future commission decisions. That would include releasing toll rate and policy scenarios with public input in late spring, early summer, as well as issuing toll rate and policy proposals, each state issuing a toll rate and policy proposal together in summer of 2027. Finally, that would, with this schedule, lead to commissions adopting final toll rates and policies at some point late fall, winter of 27, in order to support the timing for the opening of the facility expected, or the start of tolling on the current bridges, I should say, the commencement of tolling in the summer of 2028. So that's the time frame that we're working with. Of course, this really works back from that summer of 28 commencement of tolling, and we will continue to revise and update as needed in terms of our processes, and as we work through, and when you're ready to move forward, work through what any timeline changes would be as we share that with the Bi-State Tolling Subcommittee and full commission in the future.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We're not too far, 2 minutes late. You did
The other
great.
slides just address the joint work of the Oregon and ODOT and Washington Commission staff to work through how do we align the rulemaking, rate setting, regulatory procedural processes that exist for Washington and for Oregon. They're distinct, but we've worked to align the timing and the steps so that we are proceeding in a coordinated way to enable the public input to occur at the same time, for you to receive that in a coordinated way, and for rate setting decisions to move forward in alignment with each other. So despite all the background of how the steps that need to be taken on the filings, that the process really is intended to be well aligned, and for that when we communicate and engage with the public, there's common opportunities for both Oregon and Washington residents to provide their input and go from there. So.
And please include that slide too in the deck so that we can look at that and make sure that we're staying within the parameter of the timelines that we've set. So we appreciate it.
Those are part of the available slide deck we have here today. So
great. All right. With that, everyone have a great weekend. I hope your weather stays nice, and we'll see you soon.
Wonderful.
Thank you.